the surgeon secretly performed an operation on a gypsy woman who was declared hopeless. He signed his own resignation, but the next day he received a letter with a signature he recognized and froze. Before we continue the story, write in the comments what is your name and what city are you from. Night corridor, the surgical building of the hospital on duty, where fluorescent lights were constantly flickering and there was a smell of chlorine. I met Maxim Sinitsyn. Echoing silence. Only the droppers tapped on the glass, and the metal holders seemed to be counting down the seconds until the next call. He stood at the nurse's station post, leaning his palms on the cold plastic, and felt a strange mixture of fatigue and disappointment. In recent months, Maxim, a doctor whose hands were once called golden, has had everything more often than not. I had to do the same routine operations because the head doctor demanded stable statistics, and handed over difficult cases to suitable specialists, that is, those who, without unnecessary talk, he carried out the will of his superiors. Raised on the ideals of mercy, Maxim increasingly felt as if the bridge that connected his youthful dream was collapsing to save people from the current reality, where every extra minute of the punched operating time turned into a line on the financial report. He waited another call, glancing briefly at the list of patients on the monitor, and involuntarily I recalled that conversation with the head doctor 2 weeks ago, when I sympathized with him, but firmly said, "Sinitsyn, enough of your deep arguments about humanism. You are our on staff, not in the ethics department." And then the door to the emergency room suddenly swung open, with such force that the wall shook. A creaking stretcher was rolled inside, and behind a polyphonic choir burst into them, torn apart by shouts and prayers. Gypsy family, about 8 people, women in colorful scarves, men in dark raincoats, children, clinging to skirts and fingers. On the stretcher lay a young woman of about daughter, thin as a spring branch. Only her face was grey from pain and unnaturally falling. The eldest of the women, a heavy old woman, whose name the tongue did not turn to name. Her eyes shone as if from a fire inside. She grabbed the handrail of the stretcher and begged quickly, "Save Zara, doctor." Everyone said, "We can't wait. The tumor is eating her from the inside." Maxim felt the shoulders of Nurse Nadezhda, who was standing next to him, tense up. She stepped back as if she was afraid of being touched and whispered, "This is the same gypsy, which 3 clinics have already sent. Hopeless." The words hopeless and hopelessly in have been sounding too often lately, and each time, like a rusty hook, they caught Maxim for the bony ribs with conscience. Colleagues, whom the crowd pressed against the walls, they cast sidelong glances at him, as if to say, "Sinitsyn, just get involved, you'll be writing explanations again." He caught the eye of the receptionist Pace. Margarita Igorevna had already opened her mouth to demand a transfer the patient to another hospital where there are specialized specialists. But Maxim did something that sooner or later gets him into trouble. Stepped forward, laid down palm on the girl's shoulder, heard a hot whisper. "Doctor," Mom said, please don't throw your hands away." And suddenly I remembered the kitchen of my childhood communal apartment, where little Maxim quietly cried over a bowl of cold soup because doctors refused to operate on his own sister Alyonka. There was no money even for the bare necessities. He remembered how that evening the desperate mother was eager to sell the furniture just to buy a chance. And he, 12 years old, the boy gave himself his first most important vow, to become a surgeon who would not receipts are needed before picking up a scalpel. "Zara, is that your name?" he asked softly, and the girl nodded barely through the pain, hissing, "Yes, Mom is upstairs. She asked me to remember the good, doctor, because 20 years ago an unknown doctor saved her life after giving birth." And suddenly her eyelashes fluttered, as if she herself had barely believed that she was repeating this story. Maxim felt how inside him the abused determination grew stronger, as if someone had shaken his heart and pressed against him with a hot flame. He no longer saw the neglected linoleum of the corridor, did not hear the noise of indignation of Margarita Igorevna, who demanded to call the head doctor. He saw only the pale Zarina's palm and remembered his sister Elena, whose name still lived in the morning telephone conversations. Today, she is grown and healthy, working as a children's doctor precisely because of that surgeon who once violated protocol for the sake of miracle. In one long, compressed minute, Maxim made a decision that drew with the Swedish cold of the forbidden. He will save Zarina, even if they put a cross on his own contract. He ordered the patient to be transferred to the diagnostic ward, ordered an urgent take blood and do a CT scan, and, catching the frightened but devoted glances of the young intern Roman, I realized that is recruiting a team for her most dangerous operation. "Doctor, you'll get fired," she whispered. "Hope." But he only replied, "We'll talk later." He recalled the evening walks with her sister, when Alyonka, exposing her face to the rain, laughed and repeated, "You are my bravest, Max, don't forget." And just like once, for her sake, an unknown doctor stayed after his shift to lift the tortured girl into the operating room table, Maxim decided to fight the tumor at night, which had already been recognized as being outgoing beyond the framework. The hospital closed itself around him in a tight ring of rules. In a fresh order from the chief physician on strict accountability hung in the staff room, and Maxim saw this paper as if it clung to him with inky tentacles. He understood perfectly well what the amateur performance will end. But when he entered the room where Zara was lying and saw how she, pale, I raised myself with difficulty to whisper, "Doctor, I'm not afraid if it hurts. I'm only afraid that my mother won't survive if I die." He remembered himself before the morning. 6 years old, cuddled up against his sister's bed when doctors told his parents, "There's no chance of getting implants without paying for them." He remembered his mother tearing off a wedding ring and his father covering his face with his hands. Inside Maxim, a shameless, daring hope was born. And today, hearing Zarina's story about her saved mother, he saw a perfect circle of mercy that cannot be broken bureaucratic ban. He sat down on a chair next to Zara's bed, took the folder with her preliminary tests to himself and spoke quietly, as if he was telling not a diagnosis, but a fairy tale, where the key is faith. "The operation will be difficult, but there is a chance. I can't promise that it will be easy. But if we don't try, we will definitely lose. Are you ready to trust?" She squeezed his hand so hard that his bones cracked and whispered, "Done." Someone was arguing loudly behind the door, demanding that the room be vacated immediately. And Maxim imagined how tomorrow they would tell him, "Sinitsyn, you broke the system." But in his mind he saw Elena, a 7-year-old girl with huge eyes and a pipe in her throat. I saw how she smiled at the hero doctor and said, "I will live." And understood, if he chose calm and submission, would he ever forget that look? In the corridor, they had already begun to gather signatures under the application for transfer buried in palliative care. When suddenly Maxim came out, raised his hand, silencing everyone, and said briefly, "The patient will stay. I'll take it to the table. The responsibility is entirely mine. I'll sign the documents later." He saw how Margarita Igorevna's cheek muscle twitched, as the residents look at each other, deciding whose side to take. And at that moment the inner voice is the same one that once desperately whispered, "Save Elena, even if the world collapses," he said loudly. "Forward." Maxim walked towards operating unit, already going over in his head the list of instruments needed for resection: ligashry, suturing devices, spare hemostatic sponges. He knew that protocol would not allow him to open the operating room at 3 o'clock. Nights without an approved demonstrative counsel, but a distinct memory of the way he held his sister's hand as she was taken into the operating room. Him. While a storm of fear, adrenaline, and quiet joy was rising in his soul creation, he caught the steps behind. Roman was catching up, clutching a key in his fist, a map operating room. "I'm with you, doctor. If anything happens, I'll sign," that he was acting on orders. Maxim threw over his shoulder, not on orders, but on conscience. And suddenly the corridor seemed longer, as if time was stretching out, to contain all the decisions of that night. A hospital room came to mind, where he sat at the age of 15 at Alyona's bedside after her life-saving operation. And as that unknown surgeon appeared in the semi-darkness, squatted down next to him and said, "Remember, the main thing in our work is not the scalpel, but courage. Courage say yes when everyone else decided the answer was no." That night, the boy Maxim cried from gratitude and vowed to become the same. Today, facing a hopeless Zara's diagnosis, he realized that it was time to pay his debt to fate. He had not yet knew that tomorrow his world would turn upside down, but he already felt as if around him an invisible web of events is being assembled, woven from the past, present, and future where every link rings. Don't betray your oath. When the elevator doors slammed behind Maxim and Roman, inside the metal box, it seemed as if only the pulsation of blood in their temples could be heard. Roman, turning pale, he whispered, "Doctor, are you really ready to go against the head of the medical profession?" Maxim answered briefly, quietly, in a broken voice, "I can't do otherwise. I have to try." And he added, looking on the intern's trembling fingers, "We'll save her. Otherwise, why did we even choose this profession?" The elevator dinged, the doors slid open, and before them lay an empty operating room, flooded with the cold blue light of the night lamps, like a wider piece of paper on which they had to write the ending of a story about compassion and fear. Maxim did not yet know the details of Zara's vascular blockage, had not seen the latest pictures, but he had already seen the result. The girl's shining dark eyes, in which life will appear again. And when he will return to the sister's post to sign the future dismissal, he will do it with a bright smile, if only the heart would not stop hearing the weak voice of those who were written off hopeless. Because on that night, when the entire hospital was living according to instructions, only one surgeon remembered that the instructions written in the heart are more important. Sterile the darkness of the night operating room, illuminated by the copper-yellow oval of the ceiling lamps, resembled an underwater cave. The sound was muffled, as if heard through a thick layer of water, and the piercing smell of chlorhexidine tickled my nostrils to the point of making my eyes water. Maxim, who had changed into a fresh turquoise suit, checked his gloves, feeling how latex stretches over fingers. That familiar rustle always marked the beginning of battle in which the weapon was a scalpel and the enemy was death itself. Nearby, silently operating room nurse Anna Fedorova glided along, reliable as a Swiss watch. She was silent, but every movement of her hands was imbued with determination to go to the end. Maxim caught the question flashing in her green eyes and answered with only lips, "Yes, we do it." Roman, a young anesthesiologist, and in turn corrected mask and pronounced the tray protocols of dosages, as if conjuring the otherworldly strength: ketamine, 1 mg NACIG, propofol, 2 mg, succinylcholine if necessary. The three of them were united by an unspoken agreement, in which the main point was silent: the life of a priceless person. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly that it seemed as if every second was falling floor with a heavy lead ball. 2 hours, 47 minutes. Mark, you'll start counting from here, glory or ruin. Zara was transported covered with a thin green blanket, under which she could barely her chest moved. Her black, long, arrow-like eyelashes trembled. When Maxim leaned over and whispered right through the mask, "We are close. Hold on." He had no time to introduce himself, but right now he felt the fullness of his name and essence, as if Maxim Sinitsyn meant that, who will not retreat. Anna connected the monitors. Yellow pulse curve, blue-green line of oxygen saturation, respiratory cycle numbers. And each the number immediately became fast, fussy, like a child who got into noisy square. Roman was holding the drugs, his hand was shaking a little, and Maxim caught this tremor out of the corner of my eye, quietly encouraging, "Calm down, you can do it." Cut to the proscenium began when the blade of the number 10 scalpel touched the skin. The harsh light of the main lamp hit that the wound was a blinding spot of white, and the fabric spread out, revealing the crimson the inside where the tumor lived, an ugly clot of twisted vessels, deep like the roots of evil. Every time Maxim ran the scalpel, he heard a rustling sound, his own breathing under the mask, and a loud, painfully rhythmic phrase in head: "One wrong move, you'll lose your license." But immediately a second one appeared on top of it, almost child's voice. "One right move. She will live." Anna caught with a sponge the blood that had come out and fed the coagulator. An electric crackle filled the air. It was as if an invisible dragon was roaring somewhere under the ceiling. Meanwhile, behind the glass doors of the empty corridor, a drama of its own was taking place. Security guard Victor, a plump man in a blue pea coat, noticed the operating room sign was on busy and raised his eyebrows. The block should be closed at night outside of the schedule. He had already called to the duty administrator, who went to the head, Dr. Semyonov. Maxim did not see the screen of Victor's old phone, where the number of his superiors was displayed, but as if I felt the wave of the unauthorized opening of the block echoing down the corridor, and from this caused a metallic lump to grow in his throat. He couldn't let fear get to him. Arm muscles. When you cut fabric, your hand should be as still as water. That's why he mentally muted the outside world, as if turning down the volume of the radio to a whisper, and focused on the tumor fields illuminated with a blue methylene dye solution. The clock was running 3:1 minute, 3:38 minutes. Opened, the abdomen was slowly freed from adhesions. The scalpel was placed in a tray. The curette put on fragments of the infiltrate. Anna's hands gave the clips in time with her heart zari. Knock knock, clip, knock knock, clip. Maxim thought that each clip, a small nail in the coffin of his career, but at the same time a purple flower of hope that blossoms when you stitch the artery and see how the blood flow is restored. Sometimes the artery quietly cried under your hands. A thin stream of blood seeped out every minute, and then he heard Roman's sharp breath behind him, as if he was getting ready. Jump out from behind the monitor. But Maxim, bending slightly, Press the vessel with Tupfer Barmacher. Just don't panic now. He remembered his own sister, lying for 10 hours on such a table under the endless alarm signals of the machines, and this memory turned into confidence. Just as we saved Elena, we will save Zarina. Internal monologue all was often interrupted by bursts of endorphins. When it was possible to separate the main mass tumors from the mesentery, Maxim felt such a sweet fatigue in his muscles, as if he simultaneously ran a marathon and discovered a new theorem. The feeling of creation ancient, like the craft of a mason, filled the chest, blocking the fear. But at that very moment, somewhere in the emergency room, heavy steps thundered. The head physician Semyonov arrived. His voice, loud as a bell, pierced the floor. Who allowed to launch knives? Where is Sinitsyn? This one cry was enough, so that the nurses at the post would shut up. But the operating door was thicker than usual, and the noise entered only as a dull rumble. Maxim imagined the guard waving his radio, telling about illegal interference. However, the scalpel did not waver. In one movement it cut off the vascular pedicle of the tumor. Anna put the clip securely, and Roman exhaled. The pressure is stable. The fourth phase became the most dangerous. Sewing and checking for leaks. It always feels like fastening a thin zippers on fragile silk. If you pull them, the fabric will come apart. Maxim read every millimeter of the intestine, as if he was reading Braille with his fingers, making sure there are no microperforations. When the last thread of the prolink sank into pink flesh, he caught Anna's gaze, and in it he saw the same gratitude, which his sister had once seen in the eyes of her savior. At 4 minutes, a woman rose up above the monitor. Smooth green line. Zara's heart was beating steadily. Blood pressure 110/70, saturation 98. Maxim allowed himself a half smile, saying through the mask, preparing to wake up. The girl's sleepy brain responded to reduction of propofol. The eyelids moved, and Roman, shuddering, said, "Doctor, she is going upward." Watching the chest rise evenly, Maxim felt that this victory was worth 1,000 signed papers. But the world did not abandon him alone with euphoria. New steps were heard behind the doors, much more decisive. The operating door swung open like a shutter in a thunderstorm, and a small room appeared in the rays of the lamps. Semyonov's figure. White coat, tie, face dark with rage. He did not utter a word down, "Don't let me," just growled briefly. Sinitsyn. After cleaning, go to the doctor's office. Immediately. While Anna and Roman were preparing the patient for transfer to intensive care, Maxim managed to pull off his gloves and felt the skin of his fingers sting with traces of adrenaline and sweat. As the stretcher was being rolled out the door, he stroked Zara's elbow. She was still breathing through the mask, but a faint spark of consciousness was already maturing in his eyes. Whispered, "Did you do it?" The girl responded by weakly closing her fingers on his hand. The staff room smelled of coffee grounds and the cry of an electric stove. A mug of black coffee, long since cold, stood on the table. A yellow one lay nearby. Folder, a letter of resignation. Semyonov walked back and forth, throwing things around. Words in the air are heavier than bricks. Unauthorized use of the operating room, a threat to life and health, prosecutor's office. Everything was mixed with his heavy breathing. Maxim sat down quietly, holding hands on his knees, and listened as the head of the clinic wrote out accusations in bold strokes. The light in the single bulb on the ceiling flickered, and with it Sinitsyn's career was glimmering. Semyonov threw his pen on the table. "Here, sign it, and I'll close the matter." "No sign. Tomorrow I'll send the material to the researcher." Maxim looked at the sheet with his name, as if it were someone else's biography. 2 images flashed in the synchronous head. Zara, who just had a spark of opportunity, and young Maxim, standing in the dark corridor where his mother was crying. He reached out, not for the pen, but for a clean area of the table, put his palm and said quietly, so that in the echoing air the doctor's office heard these words louder than a scream. "I sign, but no, your papers are nothing compared to her heart, which is now beats." Semyonov flushed scarlet, caught his breath, but did nothing. Answered. He took the application, stamped the date and walked out, slamming the door so that old protocols fell on the floor. Anna entered almost immediately. Her eyes were shining not with tears of bitter helplessness, but with seething gratitude. She pulled her mask down to her chin, whispered, "She's stable, dog." Maxim Viktorovich and stumbled, seeing on the table a bright signature. At the corners of her mouth, an anxious arabe appeared. "You're right." He nodded, feeling the muscles in her neck go rigid. Roman appeared behind her. His shoulders hunched over at the corner. The voice was breaking. "I should have done it. I saw the guard." Maxim looked up and said, as warmly as you could, "You did your job." "We all did." He stood up slowly, threw his green cap back on the chair, and there was silence for a minute, spread out between them, while behind the wall someone was rattling a cart with laundry. At this Maxim felt a moment that was strangely empty and at the same time full. It was as if invisible shackles had fallen, leaving a bright sore, but giving freedom to breathe. With all his might. He lost his position, but kept his main line on internal ECG of conscience. Anna ran her fingers along his sleeve. In her eyes there were tears, but a barely perceptible smile on his lips. Roman looked away, as if he was afraid burst into tears, and said hoarsely, "Thank you for the lesson, boss." And in the corridor the clock struck 5 hours 02 minutes. And it seemed as if with each blow they confirmed, "Nothing, it's not over, it's just beginning." The early June light was filtering into the apartment. Through the dusty jalousie, drawing stripes on the walls that looked like strings, but instead of there was a deafening silence in these rays of music. Maxim opened the door slowly, as if he was afraid to disturb the very air, and the first thing he saw was a piano, an old one, a red flag inherited from his grandfather, on which he had once learned the lunar chant. The instrument stood by the window, covered with a heavy lid. The keys are hidden like a secret, and it seemed that the tree itself breathes reproach. "What have you done with your dream, boy?" Maxim hasn't played for many years, although sometimes I caught myself thinking that my hands remembered everything. But in the evening in the doctor's office my fingers smelled of sterile rubber, not varnished wood. Today the piano greeted him with silence, but this silence sounded louder than the most desperate cacophony. It accused, reminded, rang in temples along with a distinct thought, "You've lost your job." He walked along the corridor, throwing off his shoes, and every little thing, an empty cup on the shelf, forgotten on the chair, the shirt screamed about the unsaid. In the bedroom, a green spot glowed notifications on his phone, but Maxim was in no hurry to look. He was afraid to open it. A world that probably already knew about his self-dismissal. Opening the window, he inhaled the smell morning squeal and, closing his eyes, suddenly saw himself as a boy standing on tram stop next to Elena, when they were listening to a street pianist. Back then, he vowed to be like the hero surgeon who saved his sister. Today, it seemed like the chain of links broke off. In the kitchen, where the pink teapot had long since peeled, he automatically poured coffee into Turku, but his hand shook and the loose grains scattered like dark rain. The Turk had never seemed so heavy before. Under the noise of the heating stove, thought swarmed. Ordinator's signature. Prosecutor's office. He presented the headlines. Surgeon violated regulations. Endangered patient. But then a counterframe would appear, Zara's wide dark eyes, a bursting tear. Joy on her cheek. Maxim pressed his palm to his chest, as if checking to see if it had stopped. His own heart, and whispered, "I'd do it again." When the coffee boiled, the booming the intercom's ringing broke the silence. The sound cut like a knife. He lowered the Turk. The splashes of boiling water burned his hand, but he felt almost no pain. Only a blunt amazement. Who could come early in the morning if all colleagues are probably avoiding conversation? The intercom beeped again, and Maxim, still wiping his hand with a towel, picked up the receiver. Courier delivery. Wake up. Sign. He didn't order anything, but silently pressed button. A minute later, a young man in a signature green jacket stood in the doorway. In his hands he held a flat cream envelope, sealed with sealing wax with a dark blue coat of arms. For you urgently and personally. The young man handed over a tablet for signature. Maxim withdrew distantly Sinitson M.V. It was as if I was writing someone else's name. And only when the door slammed shut did I feel how pulse pounding. The envelope was thick and embossed. Initials glittered on it, and these initials gushed memory like a Pond Y. Machenko, Professor Legend, whose name in medicine they whispered it, like a spell. It was he who came out of it 20 years ago operating room to little Maxim and said those very words about courage. Hart Sinitson began to pound so hard that it seemed he would break free. He ran his finger along the ornate calligraphy. Each letter seemed to pulse, and with a confident jerk he tore the sealing wax. Inside was a folded sheet of expensive, slightly creamy paper and a flash drive with an engraved emblem of the National Scientific Center of Surgery. Maxim unfolded the letter and began to read, and the lines flashed like lights on an evening stage. Dear Maxim Viktorovich, yesterday at 3:52 minutes your team completed the operation, which most experts considered impossible. A brief analysis followed. Resection progress. The level of complexity of the indicated manipulations, and each phrase breathed respect, not punitive officialdom. The videographer of the volunteer the open surgery project was in room number 4 as part of testing new cameras. The files were transferred to me, and I personally verified that your skills meets the highest standards. Let me invite you to participate in the competition for the position of head of the Department of Innovative Surgery of our center. The signature is flowery, but confident, and a bold period at the end of the simple Machenko. Maxim reread it, then again, feeling the world floating beneath his feet, as if the floor was made of mercury balls. He remembered how at the operating table, under the white light of the lamps, I wanted to shout down the fear. I remembered how Anna served clips, and Roman was reporting the dosages. He remembered how Semyonov was shouting about prosecutor's office. And now Professor Machenko, his childhood hero, calls him to manage an entire department. His head spun, he sank into a chair, the letter trembled in his fingers. Could it be that do they notice the good after all? Is it really not in vain? The phone on the nightstand beeped. It took a look. Message from Anna. Patient unstable. How are your fingers? Printed. It seems we have a miracle. Come. He sent it and immediately scared. It's too early to rejoice. But the heart was already beating differently, not dully, but with a light a spring of hope. He stood up, walked over to the piano and opened the keys with his palm. The pads of the fingers touched the ivory. The note A, pure, thin, cut through the air. He pressed EA, then MI, and the melody rang out timidly, but real. My grandfather once explained that in order for the sound to be clear, you must not be afraid of the weight of your hand. Maxim closed his eyes, allowing himself 3 bars of Schumann, and suddenly realized that in his there is room for sound and life again, not just the ticking of operating hours. Half an hour later there was a knock, quiet, as if cautious. Anna was standing on the threshold, her hair tucked under thin dark green headscarf. Eyes sparkle with both anxiety and joy. I'm on taxi, as I saw your message, she said, entering. And Maxim felt the apartment come to life, as if fresh air had been let in. He showed her the envelope, and she, holding it with both hands, fingers, read quickly. Her cheeks turned pink. This is the same one, she began. But he nodded, interrupting. Yes, he had seen the video. Invites. Anna closed her eyes, as if fighting back a surge of tears, and suddenly laughed very quietly, with some kind of pure laugh that made Maxim ache something inside my chest. It wasn't laughter at my luck, it was laughter of relief. How as if she had opened a window into a stuffy room. He put on the kettle, the same pink one, cracked, but now even its whistle did not irritate. It was part of the new morning. Anna said that in intensive care Zara was already moving her fingers, and the girl's mother holds her hand and sorts through some amulets, whispering thanks prayers. Maxim listened, feeling the warmth growing under his skin. After all, the world was still capable of justice. Anna noticed a piano with slightly open keys and, running her fingers over them, asked, "Do you play?" He shrugged his shoulders once. Now, rarely. She pressed one key. The clear sound flashed and died, and then turned to him. There their eyes met, and in the short, silent duel a clear glimpse flashed through mutual care. The letter was lying on the table, next to a flash drive. Maxim connected it to laptop, and a frame flickered on the screen. The operating room. He himself was wearing a mask. Nadrai a white spot of light. He saw his own hand confidently separating tumor, how Anna catches blood, how Roman checks the indicators on the monitor. Because of the figure of a security guard got into the lens through the glass. The footage was actually captured. Anna watched without blinking. A tear rolled down her cheek. He held out his hand, brushed it off. The gesture was almost weightless, but there was more than friendly in it. Participation. The aroma of caffeine wafted through the open window on the first floor and awakening city. Maxim turned to Anna. The question trembled in his voice. How do you think I have a chance? She smiled, and there was a firmness in that smile. Calm down. Do you have talent? And now the proof. He sighed as if he had let go of the weight he had been carrying on his shoulders since yesterday. Nights. The future was still foggy, but in that fog a light shone, a light that now seemed much closer. While they were drinking fresh coffee, The morning rays colored the wall behind the piano with a golden rectangle. In it motes of dust danced like tiny comets. Anna said that Semyonov, having learned about video recordings, began frantically calling lawyers. "He's afraid of a scandal," she said evenly. Maxim imagined the faces of the head doctors, and for some reason inside he didn't anger flared, only tired sympathy. He knew that fear often ruled people, but now, having received a letter from Marchenko, he realized that fear can contrast another. There was an empty cup on the table, and running a finger along rim, Maxim whispered, as if confiding a secret to Anna. "Remember, I was talking about the circle mercy. That surgeon saved Elena, I saved Zara. Now Marchenko has saved me." Anna nodded. Their palms barely touched on the tabletop, and there was no need explain. Something fragile but strong, like the first sprout, was being born between them, breaking through the asphalt. Maxim opened his notebook, took out a pen and started writing a list of documents for the competition. Although an hour ago he thought that his diploma was now only paper. Every line, a certificate in colorectal surgery, the laparoscopy certification seemed like a newly found stone for the mosaic of the future. Anna was leafing through it nearby. Calendar, estimating submission deadlines. He glanced at the piano. The lid remained open, and the white keys caught the sun's reflection, as if smiled back at him. The coffee was gone, but the conversation was not. He was talking about how as a child I hid orange peels in a music case because I was afraid that the piano should smell of joy, not old dust. She dreamed of to become a surgeon, but didn't get in, chose nursing because she was afraid to lose any chance of being in the operating room. These confessions fell softly in the morning, like raindrops on hot asphalt, raising steam from memories. At the end he stood up and closed the envelope, this time carefully. He put a fresh sheet of music on top, empty and clean. Anna asked with her eyes, "Why?" And he replied, "To remember, you can still start with the note C." She smiled in such a way that the corners of her eyes gathered into slight wrinkles. At that moment, Maxim's phone beeped. A message from an unknown number. Zara asks, "Is the doctor alive?" He laughed, sent a short message. "Alive and planning again, play the music of the heart for you." And Anna quietly patted him on the shoulder, as one does those who share the common burden. The morning continued to fill with light, and even the piano no longer seemed silent. There was a promise in the silence. Someday he would sit down, will lift the lid, put his fingers in and give this house a new lunar Sanada, not melancholic, but victorious, bright. And for now, on the table next to the cups lay a letter from fate, and in every line there is confirmation. If you do not give yours, why? The world will answer one day therefore. Sunny morning, like a copper lithography. Met Maxim at the threshold of the National Scientific Center of Surgery named after academician Bekhanov. The glass facade sparkled as if the city itself raised the mirror to the heavens, and the wide steps, edged with cedar rollers, seemed like a grand staircase to a new life. He got out of the taxi with Anna, who insisted on accompanying him on the day of the big signing. And now their steps sounded close, almost synchronously, like a double pulse inside the atrium, where the light murmured under the arch's mosaic of daylight hatches. They were met by a resident coordinator in a snow-white suit and, leading corridors, quietly announced, "The professor is waiting in his office." Maxim felt beads of sweat appear on his temples, not from the heat, but from intracostal tremors. It was as if he was returning not just to a hospital, but to a childhood myth, where a door had once opened wide the operating room door and that same legendary Marchenko came out. The professor's office turned out to be spacious with high windows and oak cabinets filled with models' vascular aneurysms and translucent 3D printed organ reconstructions, reminiscent of stained glass. There was a grand piano by the wall, a detail that made Maxim's heart sank, as if the very air confirmed the secret connection between surgery and music. Professor Yuri Efimovich rose from the table with a wide grey head. With a straight back, he extended his hand. The handshake was firm, warm, and the voice is velvety. "Nice to meet you in person. Maxim Viktorovich, I saw your hand on the notes." While they were sitting down, Anna remained at the door, and her gaze beamed with pride, as if she were holding an invisible torch illuminating the way. Marchenko began without preludes, but every word flowed like a precise scalpel. Yesterday, when volunteers handed him a video from the operating room, he immediately recognized the handwriting of a man who believes in the uncondemned. Then, smiling with the corners of his eyes, said that the patient Zara managed to wake up at night, and in her delirium she repeated story about the surgeon who saved her mother many years ago. I heard this parable. The resident on duty asked for information and realized that it was the professor in question, Marchenko. The same resident, having received confirmation, immediately contacted the NNC. And thus the story came full circle. The daughter's gratitude intersected with the professor's own long-standing debt. Yuri Efimovich spoke quietly, turning his palm to his heart. For many years he had been searching students who are able to put ethics above protocol, and, seeing Maxim at the table's seriously ill gypsy, he realized that he had finally met his soulmate. On the table lay documents, an application for the transfer of the personnel reserve, an agreement on management of the Department of Innovative Technologies of Open Surgery, and thick folder with a logo. Everything is ready for signing. But as soon as Maxim took up pen, as an assistant burst into the office with a bright red service handset. The bell rang. On a direct line with clearance confidentially. The professor nodded, pressed the speakerphone, and the speaker spat out the voice of the head Dr. Semyonov, unpleasantly rattling from excusable haste. Yuri Efimovich, good afternoon. This is Semyonov, clinic number 17. I have to explain about Sinitsyn. We did not have full information. You understand the pressure, the reporting, and, of course, no formal penalty has been applied to him yet. A statement of his own accord. A purely internal step. We ready to withdraw. The professor calmly interrupted. Thank you for the clarification, but, fortunately, we are already inviting Dr. Sinitsyn to take a key position with us, and I hope that the past misunderstanding will not prevent you from sending a positive reference. A gulping, suppressed silence hung in the receiver. Semyonov tried to butt in, but Marchenko hung up, saying quietly, We have a lot of work, little time. Maxim sat as if under his skin an icy solution of confession was introduced. Yesterday this voice accused, today made excuses. Anna, who continued to stand in the corner, smiled cautiously. Her eyes sparkled. They reflected how all the previous fear was becoming covered with thin cracks and crumbling, like old plaster. The professor extended a pen with a gold nib, and Maxim, holding it for a moment, brought out the signature, intricate, slightly sweeping, and the final flourish as if he had cut the last ropes that bound him to doubt. The following weeks passed like changing frames in a movie projector. Moving into a service apartment with a view of botanical garden. Endless planning meetings where Maxim met engineers, responsible for robot-assisted manipulation. Team selection. He insisted on the transfer Anna as a senior operating nurse, and arranged an interview for Roman for a promotion. Both accepted. Zara, meanwhile, was recovering in the same clinic, and each new analysis showed a decline in anchor markers. She was slowly but surely moving towards remission. Mom came into the room with lush bouquets of dried mountain herbs and babbled prayers of thanksgiving, and Zara herself sewed something by hand, hiding it under her pillow. Maxim was touched by this, but he didn't ask, and there was almost no time left. Center was in full swing preparing for the grand opening of the new wing. Where the operating rooms, the walls of glass were supposed to broadcast the intervention into the classrooms. The opening day, shining and golden, arrived quietly. But, entering the hall, Maxim felt the hum of human voices under the dome, like the flapping of thousands of wings. Banners with the NNC logo shimmered with azure. The LD screen panels ran a running line were bringing out the program of the festivities. Professor Marchenko met him at the podium. The grey-haired, his hair sparkled silver, and in his hands the professor held a small wooden box. He whispered, almost inaudibly, "There will be one surprise." A man appeared next to him. Minister of Health. The TV cameras flashed. Maxim was not used to flashes. They were an eyesore. But Anna, standing a little behind, caught his anxiety and simply touched the back of his hand, weightlessly, like a drop of dew. This gesture passed through him in a wave of calm. Professors, investors, and officials came up on stage. The host announced opening of the department. When Nikolai Sergeyevich, the deputy minister, pushed aside purple fabric, everyone saw a shiny brass plate. Department Innovative Surgery named after Academician Bekhanov. Head, Candidate of Medical Sciences, M.V. Sinitsyn. Applause, camera flashes. The world has revealed hugs, and Maxim felt a shudder inside. He was that boy again. The operating room door, but now the door was swinging open for him. Entering with a group of guests into a new room, he saw that one of the walls was transparent. A sparkling room with a surgical robot. Lamps, petals bent like flowers to a bud. And here, as a symbol of the eternal circle of creation, there was a bed on wheels, and on it was a Zara in a smart light robe, pale but smiling. The doctors rolled her only to witnesses saw the impossible possible. Zara's mother bowed with a handkerchief in her hands to everyone she met, and the patient herself, as soon as Maxim came closer, raised her the palm on which rested a small amulet keychain, shimmered with velvet red cord, and in the center a neatly embroidered heart, stylized as a daisy. Ruby and golden in hue, intertwined into an intricate web of vessels. Zara spoke quietly but clearly. She and her grandmother have been sewing amulets all their lives, and this one must guard the heart of the one who saves others. Maxim took the amulet. His fingers trembled. When he felt the soft warmth of the fabric and the subtle scent of oregano, Grandma sprinkled with herbs. It was as if a lamp had flared up inside. The memory of the night of the operating room, fear, risk, license paragraphs. All this dissolved in a simple gesture gratitude. Anna stood next to him, barely touching his fingers, and at that moment he squeezed her hand not as a commander to a subordinate, but as a man to a man. Their palms joined over the tiny heart of the keychain, and Maxim suddenly heard his own voice, quiet but full of firmness. Fear will no longer rule my life. He said this on the exhale, almost in a whisper, but he felt Anna nod with a slight, placating smile. In the evening, when the guests left, Professor Marchenko and Maxim lingered in the empty corridor. The light of the lamps here was shorter, the sounds muffled by freshly washed linoleum and the barely perceptible ozone of sterility. Yuri Efimovitch put his hand on his shoulder, saying, "Remember, boy, what you are like. Will you play the first notes in the new section?" Maxim smiled. "I think I'll start with Oleg Mannentrop. Let there be a rhythm of life, but without fuss." Professor nodded, patted him on the back quietly, and ran down the corridor. Left alone, Maxim and Anna walked slowly, as if along the embankment of an unfamiliar but beautiful place. Cities. He turned the amulet, and the golden thread caught the light. In every reflection a new beginning was in sight. He no longer felt guilty about signing his resignation. She became a brick in the bridge to this day. In its place, pride settled, not loud, but even, like deep bass piano. Another fragile feeling was coming out. To Anna, to her quiet determination, to warm laughter, to that friendship that could become something more. They stopped at a glass wall. Behind it, the light of a robot assistant swayed smoothly, like giant lily in an aquarium. Maxim folded his palms behind his back, as if the conductor before the first swing. Then he looked at the sign with his name on it. Sparkled in the light of the lamps, and I heard the quiet, confident music of my own heart. This is how the sonata of victory may sound, not loudly, but unchangeably. He hugged Anna by the shoulders, not embarrassed. CCTV cameras and whispered, "We still have a lot to do, but I know the main thing. If we don't get scared, everything will work out." She responded with the same affectionate touch, and the world froze. Recognizing that compassion can indeed not only to destroy careers, but to raise them to a height where there is no place for fear. Passed exactly 1 year since that May morning when, above the wholly transparent hall of the National, a purple banner was raised at the Scientific Center of Surgery, revealing a brass plaque with the name of the manager M.V. Sinitson. And now the summer air smelled not only with linden from the Badsad, but also with fresh paint. The new wing was completed faster graphics, because the team, inspired by the example of their young leader, worked just as tirelessly as he once worked with a scalpel in a night operating room. Maxim walked along the bright corridor where the walls were decorated with interactive panels with recordings of the most complex interventions, and in familiar faces glided through every frame. Anna was already in the rank of Chief Operating Officer Sisters. Roman, who defended his PhD in anesthesiology, robot-assisted resections. Dozens of residents he taught not to be afraid to go beyond the permitted limits if the patient's life demands otherwise. In the heart of there lived in him a quiet, even fire of satisfaction, but not vanity. Each one day he saw the growth of a small but stable republic of compassion, where there is no place for fear. Today, the center held the first international symposium of Surgery Without Borders, and Maxim was preparing for a live broadcast of the operation, which seemed it was impossible yesterday to perform combined resection in conditions of total damage vessels. Behind the glass, a robot assistant was being prepared. The manipulators were shining, like flexible steel lilies. The monitors displayed a digital model of the vascular network patient, and the students on the balconies whispered their anticipation of seeing the Maestro Sinitsina is in business. But before the start, Maxim lingered by the elevator. Zara came out of it in a light dress the color of mountain and Kinorpus. Her smile was bright, her hair was braided in braid. And you wouldn't know from her gait that a year ago her body was ravaged by illness. She stepped towards him confidently, extended her palm, on which lay that very embroidered amulet of the heart. It was kept by Maxima on the keychain from the office, but today returned to the owner for a moment, because Zara wanted to tell. Analyses clean, anchor markers within normal limits. Doctors recommended control only pictures every 6 months. Maxim squeezed her fingers, looking at the girl's eyes. Gratitude shines, multiplied by her own dignity. She survived, so she won. Anna came up from behind. Her green eyes were shining, but her hands were confidently holding tablet with a control checklist. Catheters, balloons, coagulation. Maxim caught her gaze. That gaze at everything. Working composure, tenderness that is invisible to outsiders, a common past and a common future. The operation was like a single piece of music. The robot worked to the beat of the single movements. Maxim's hands. Anna handed over the instrument. Even before he asked, Roman held anesthesiological indicators in a flawless straight line. And from the audience, where the broadcast was on for 8 hours, and the admiring whispers of many languages could be heard. When the last scene was laid, Maxim, without raising his head, said, "It's time, wake up." And the patient's heart obeyed a rhythm as even as a metronome. 10 minutes later, when the equipment had already been sterilized, Professor Mochenko entered the room. His grey hair shone in the light. Lamps. The smile was soft. He congratulated the team, then took Maxim aside and announced that he was leaving for the Distinguished Scientific Council at the Ministry and would like to see Sinitsyn as his representative at the International Association for Surgical Ethics. In response, Maxim shook hands teachers, feeling how the transition of generations occurs not through orders, but through trust. That same evening, a symposium flowed into the award ceremony. In the large hall under the high glass dome, a long table was laid out for buffet. But the main thing is that they brought a granite slab onto the stage, the foundation where they were going to install a new sign. Department of Clinical Ethics and Humanitarian Surgery named after Yurchenko. Head of the Department of Medical Sciences M.V. Sinitsyn. The rector of the university, Professor Butkiewicz, delivered a lush speech on humanism. But what touched Maxim was not this, but the moment when Zara's mother, a small, stooped woman with black braids, squeezed her way to the stage and knelt down in front of him, clutching a warm handmade scarf to his chest. He lifted her up, whispering that gratitude had already been addressed, and I felt tears filling my eyes, not from pride, but from the fact that the chain of goodness continues to close. Late at night, when the hall was empty, Maxim and Anna slipped out onto the balcony of the department office. The city lay scattered below glowing dots. The wind brought the smells of heated asphalt and magnolias. Maxim took a small flash drive out of his pocket, a copy of the very video from which his new path began, and he put it in Anna's palm, saying that one day they would show his children. Let them know how it all began. Anna smiled, touched him cheeks and said, "What is even more important? To show this video to students so that they believed, the protocol is not higher than a person." Their embrace was long, but did not require words. Their shadows were reflected in the glass behind them, like two outlines of one figure. The story of Maxim Sinitsyn is not only a chronicle of one professional rise, but also proof that in medicine, as in music, there is a tone to which everyone is attuned other notes. This tone of compassion, it is quiet, but its resonance is endless. The night operation that put his career on the line was not a rebellion against the system, but a reminder to the system of its purpose to serve the living, and not a report. Zara's gratitude, Anna's support, Professor Mochenko's wisdom, all of this a link in a chain that is stronger than any statute because it is forged from human courage. Semyonov, who once threatened to become a prosecutor, now recommends that young doctors watch Sinitsyn's lectures. After all, he saw the power of a doctor not in the position, but in the ability to say even when the sign says, "No entrance." And if one day, lost in the quiet corridors of a new clinic, you will hear the sound of the moon's sanada from behind the half-open door, know that this is the manager plays an old Blutner, and next to him, leaning on a piano, a woman with clear green eyes stands and listens to the keys repeating the main thing, the rule of separation. Fear cannot rule the heart when the heart is commanded to love. Another 6 months passed, and the calendar turned imperceptibly to December, when the wind blew through the glass walls of the clinical ethics department fragile snowflakes, like phosphorus sparks flickering in the light of the corridor lamps, and there was such a work-related tension inside the department that it was freezing outside seemed like a distant fantasy. Maxim sat at the oval table in the room of silence. So he called the former micro-conference room, which he converted into a creative laboratory. Models were kept here: vessels, a work simulator, several real guitars, and even an ancient metronome, rescued from the attic of the conservatory. All this created a resonant symphony future ideas. A news feed flashed on the holographic screen in front of him. The State Department Healthcare has unveiled a pilot program called Algorithmic Resource Savings, where the trigger will automatically rank patients according to the coefficient of appropriateness of the intervention. Below in large print was an example. A 6-year-old girl with congenital heart defect is not a priority due to the high risk of reoperations. Maxim felt Golka's blood rush to his temples. The story of Aliona and Zara came to life. Only now the chief physician commercialist answered for the cruel sentence, and the cold calculator, deprived of the opportunity to hear the whispers of his frightened parents. He ran his hand over screen, enlarging the article. The list of expert consultants included 2 investors, recently who joined the center's board of trustees in order to optimize funding. His fingers ached as if he were clutching an invisible scalpel. That same night he raised Anna and Roman for an urgent meeting. In the protocol storage they spoke in whispers, but each phrase sounded like a stationary knife cut thick cardboard. Maxim explained, if the algorithm is accepted without adjustments, the clinic will have to refuse children with severe defects, and this will cross out the very philosophy departments. Roman ruffled his hair. His cheeks flushed with excitement. We can prove it, that long-term effectiveness is higher if surgery is performed early. Anna, touching a heart amulet on her chest, she said that we need not just statistics, but history, which can hit the heart, just like the volunteer video once hit them. Then Maxim suggested something crazy, to make a live demonstration of a hybrid intervention on the child's heart, which the algorithm had already deemed inappropriate, providing a broadcast analytics on sustainability and quality of life prognosis. The goal is not only to save one girl, but also to clearly show the council and the ministry. Humanism and economy are compatible, if we count not in quarters, but in life. The morning brought another touch to the alarming picture. An email with an official header arrived, a notification about the unscheduled audit of the Innovation Fund. Maxim grinned involuntarily. Investors decided to undermine his rear in order to prevent unnecessary initiatives. He went to Professor Machenko, who, although he was listed as an advisor, he oversaw the vascular bioprinting laboratory. The old man greeted him with a gentle smile, as if he had guessed about the storm and, having listened proposal for a public operation, silently walked up to the world map on the wall. On it pins were used to mark the centers where the algorithmic savings program was being implemented. Then he pointed to an empty corner near the quietly flickering NNC logo and said, "This is where you need to set a counterexample." The teacher support turned the idea into plan. The patient selection took 2 days of trials and tears. Cardiac Surgery Board presented 8 stories of children, but Maxim could not forget the letter from Alina's mother Mukina, a girl from the Tula region with a Logii-Phallotetrad, which the algorithm has already sent to low priority. The letter contained pictures attached, a house, a dog, a chocolate-colored sun, and a signature in crooked letters, "I want run like a brother." When Maxim read, the lunar sonata sounded in his ears, as if it itself fate pressed the minor key. So he said to his colleague, cardiac surgeon Lewandowski, "Let's take Alina." Meanwhile, in the meantime, Anna developed a script for the broadcast. Act 1, a performance clinical case. The second 3D reconstruction of the defect on the hologram. Third, live robotic access to the right gastric artery. Sub-commentary by Lewandowski. Fourth, analytics economists biostatisticians on the benefits of early intervention. The Investors' Council learned about the project after the fact. At an unscheduled meeting in a panoramic hall where the glass wall gave a view of the evening city, Maxim for the first time in his life collected words as scalpel for very fine cutting. He spoke quietly, but each sentence lay like a seam of proline. And when he finished, a heavy pause hung in the hall. Representative of the Innovation Fund, young business angel, with a fashionable grey strand and black hair, noted that public failure would lower the shares of the beneficial owners' enterprises, and asked with a cold smile, "Do you guarantee success?" Maxim looked at his fingers, where the white trace of athletics from the training session had not yet dried, and said, "I guarantee courage. And success depends on our honesty with the child." The question stopped, and he realized that if he failed, it would be not only the separation, but also the entire ethical platform will collapse. The preparations were carried out in the mode of a military operation. The operating room was equipped with 2 additional robotic manipulators for quick tool changes. rewritten backlight code so that the thin vessels reflect the contrast on the screen. Anna compiled a 120-point checklist, which Roman called a land-based 1 Icarus, a hint at the ancient Soviet plane glider. Maxim at night looked through Alina's echocardiograms, using a pencil to mark out the possible trajectories of the manipulators. And on the walls a web of arrows grew in the laboratory, reminiscent of a musical staff, where the arteries were notes and the valves were pauses. Finally, the day of the operation arrived. In the hall again, the red carpet was rolled out, but this time it seemed sarcastically contrasting. It all happened not for the applause, but for the girls' chance to breathe deeply. Palace Hall for broadcast filled not only with scientists and journalists, but also with officials, and somewhere on the side lurked investors, looking like a flock of crows in expensive suits. Alina's mother sat on the podium, hugging soft yellow bear that she had given her daughter that morning. Maxim walked towards operating room, feeling my heart pounding wildly under my robe. Not fear, but frantic readiness for the most difficult chord. Cold, sterile silence. The operating room was pierced by sound. The robot was activated. Red and blue the indicators flashed like night lights on a bridge. Then an electronic metronome. Roman set it to 68 beats for the average heart rate of a child in anesthesia. Anna put gloves on Maxim, and their fingers touched briefly. But this moment was enough to catch one breath for both of them. Lewandowski, tall, with an aquiline profile, stood at the visualization console. The broadcast began, and Maxim took hold of the handles of the manipulators. Alina's skin, thin, almost transparent, flared up under the rays of the lamps with a purple swelling of the drug. And on the huge screen above the first cut, thin as a crack in ice, was visible through the crack. The operation lasted 2 hours 47 minutes, but for Maxim time turned into an endless flickering spiral. He performed an endoscopic shunt around a stenotic artery. I caught the slightest tremor of the worker, and every time I felt a threatening vibration, Mochenko's voice rang in his head, "Don't be afraid of the weight of your hand." He recalled the night operation with Zara, a tiny heart, a keychain on her chest, Alina drawing the first flower after discharge, and these images melted, raising the level of adrenaline to pure clarity. Anna, anticipating the movement, handed out clips and napkins as if conducting time. By the third hour, the monitor showed an alarming peak, a spasm of the right branch coronary. The gallery gasped. The presenter changed his voice, describing the critical moment. Maxim, as if hearing the hall's breathing as well, he abruptly changed the plan. Instead of the standard dilator microcotida with nitric oxide. Instant relaxation, then stent pedal, and on the screen a wave of green numbers began to appear. The pressure dropped to safe. The pulse stabilized. The audience exhaled. The TV crew changed camera plan, capturing a close-up of Maxim's face. A bead of sweat was running down his cheek, but eyes did not twitch. When the last scene point fell on the pericard, the red indicator of the presidiary couplet flashed with an anemic glow. The hall rose like a wave. Applause, camera flashes, shouts of bravo in different languages. Maxim leaned back, feeling as if the music died down, and he quietly exhaled. "Wake up, baby," in response to a smooth ECG curve lit up on the monitor, like a note being played on a clean copy. An hour later, in the intensive care unit, Maxim saw Alina open her eyes. First clouded by muscle relaxants, then clearing. She tried to smile under the oxygen mask, and the mother, squeezed between the infusion pump racks, pressed against the lips of a soft bear, not holding back tears. At that moment, a silent voice entered the ward. 3 investors came in. The young one with a grey strand looked at the monitor where the heart was the girl's beat with a regular rhythm. Then he turned his gaze to Maxim and quietly said, as if admitting defeat, "We will recalculate the coefficients." At the press conference in the evening, Maxim spoke not about heroism, but about the systemic benefit. Earlier, an operation with a robot assistant saved a child 2 decades of active life, which is equivalent to an economic contribution to the budget in the millions. The officials nodded, but the audience listened not to the graphs, but to the pauses in which the human heart sounded. After the speech, Maxim found Anna in the background of the noisy scene. She was holding a tablet with messages. Global agencies have called the broadcast a moral trigger for machine healthcare. He hugged her with one arm, and at that moment Professor Mochenko approached from the crowd with a small case. Inside was a silver key to an old Bluthner piano. The old man said only, "I gave instrument in your office. Continue to tune the world to the right tone." Night. It was snowy. The wind lashed against the glass like a fast bow against a string. But on the roof of the clinic, where Maxim and Anna went after the press noise, it was quiet. They stood at the parapet, the fresh snow crust crunching under their feet. Airplanes were blinking overhead. Maxim held the heart amulet. On the backside, Zara's grandmother had embroidered new symbols, a bunch of notes and a stethoscope. He turned to Anna, saying quietly, so that only the stars could hear, "Fear is cramped in the chest where music lives." It nodded and added that for someone who knows how to connect seams and notes, the automatic algorithm is no match. They kissed easily, without any unnecessary doom, as if they always knew that the moment would happen at the height, and in this the kiss mixed the aroma of cold air, the slight bitterness of antiseptic on her hands, and the distant taste of the coffee candy she loved. Dawn gave the city a mother-of-pearl haze, and with the first light came the order of the ministry. Pilot project algorithmic savings to be finalized, taking into account the Humanistic Amendment Index, officially called Sinitsyn-Marchenko coefficient. In the office above the piano, Maxim hung printout of the order, and next to it is Elena's childish drawing. Now the house and the sun became brighter, and underneath them a girl in a yellow dress was running, drawing an arc of a rainbow out of pastels. The quiet click of the metronome measured out a new melody of future changes that began not in laws, but in the decision of one surgeon to tell the algorithm, life without a price tag.